In the late summer of 2015, a group of college friends, Anna, Ben, Sarah, and Jake, decided to take a camping trip deep into the woods of the Appalachian Mountains. They sought a break from their busy lives, craving adventure and the serenity of nature. They chose a secluded campsite known as Pine Hollow, a place rumored to be beautifully untouched, but largely forgotten by hikers and campers alike. After hours of winding through narrow, unmarked trails, they arrived at their destination. The campsite was nestled among towering pine trees, their dense foliage casting dark shadows across the ground. The air was thick with the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. As they set up their tents and gathered around the fire pit, a feeling of isolation began to settle over them. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. As night fell, the forest transformed into a labyrinth of darkness. The stars were hidden behind a canopy of leaves, and the moonlight barely pierced through the treetops. They huddled around the fire, telling ghost stories and laughing to dispel the growing unease. Ben, always the prankster, suggested a game of truth or dare to lighten the mood. Sarah, the most cautious of the group, drew the dare first. Ben dared her to venture into the woods alone for 15 minutes. Reluctantly, she agreed, armed with only a flashlight and her phone. As Sarah disappeared into the darkness, the others kept their eyes on the flickering glow of her flashlight until it was swallowed by the blackness of the forest. Minutes ticked by, and an uneasy silence fell over the group. They waited, the only sounds their own breathing and the occasional rustle of leaves. Just as they began to worry, Sarah emerged from the trees, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She said nothing but seemed almost too frightened to speak. The flashlight in her hand trembled. The group quickly moved on, attributing her fear to the unsettling darkness of the woods. They returned to their campfire, trying to brush off the incident as nerves. As they sat there, Ben noticed that the forest had grown eerily silent. The chirps of crickets and hoots of owls had stopped, replaced by an almost oppressive stillness. Around midnight, the fire began to die down. The group decided to call it a night, retreating to their tents. The forest outside was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the dying embers. As Anna and Sarah settled into their tent, they heard something odd, a faint rhythmic tapping like fingers drumming on a wooden surface. Anna, trying to dismiss the sound as the wind or a falling branch, poked her head outside the tent. The tapping seemed to stop, only to start again, this time accompanied by an unsettling low moan. The sound was coming from all around them, blending into the whispers of the trees. She called out to Ben and Jake, but they were already asleep. Unable to ignore the growing sense of dread, Anna woke Sarah, and the two decided to investigate. They grabbed their flashlights and cautiously stepped out into the darkness. The forest seemed to close in around them, shadows shifting and moving as if alive. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. They followed the sound, which seemed to lead them deeper into the woods. After walking for what felt like hours, they came upon an old, dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. Its wooden walls were covered in vines, and the windows were shattered and boarded up. The door creaked on its hinges as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty and stale, filled with the scent of decay. The beam of their flashlights revealed broken furniture and cobwebs draped over everything. As they explored the cabin, they found something that chilled them to the bone. Strange markings carved into the wooden walls. The symbols were crude and unfamiliar, arranged in a way that suggested some sort of ritualistic pattern. They also discovered a small journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. The writing was barely legible, but the entries spoke of a solitary figure who had lived in the cabin long ago, a man who had gone mad and believed he was being watched by unseen eyes. The final entry was scrawled in frantic, erratic handwriting. They come at night, they listen, they know. Panic set in. Anna and Sarah, now thoroughly frightened, decided they needed to get back to the campsite. They hurried through the dark forest, their flashlights barely cutting through the oppressive gloom. The tapping and moaning continued, following them as they stumbled back towards their camp. When they arrived, they found Ben and Jake awake, their faces etched with worry. They told their friends about the cabin and the journal, but Ben and Jake were skeptical. They suggested it was just a prank or a figment of their imagination. Despite their reassurances, the group decided to pack up and leave. As they hastily dismantled their camp, the tapping grew louder, more urgent. It was as if the forest itself was trying to drive them away. The moaning intensified, filling the air with an almost palpable sense of dread. As they loaded their gear into the car, they heard something that froze them in place, a guttural growling sound coming from the trees. It was close, too close. They quickly finished packing and drove away, their headlights slicing through the darkness of the forest. Behind them, the tapping and moaning faded into the distance, but the sense of being watched remained. Weeks later, Sarah received a letter in the mail. It was from an unknown sender and contained a single photograph, a picture of the cabin with the date and time of their visit written on the back. The photo had been taken from inside the cabin, showing the four of them standing just outside, oblivious to the camera. The sight of the photo and the realization that someone, or something, had been watching them the entire time, left them with an indelible mark of fear. The woods of Pine Hollow remained a haunting memory, a place where the darkness seemed to watch and listen, waiting for its next visitors.